Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I am your host, Richard Kaufman. I'm so pumped up. We just got the brand new intro. I love my music. I'm so grateful for my friend William for putting it together. But so thank you so much. But guys, this is going to be a great episode. I'm a newbie and I'm 3 years into this podcasting thing with over 500 episodes, but I'm still a rookie. And when I have advice, I ask this gentleman right here about podcasting. So if you ever want to start a podcast, be a guest, definitely make sure you listen to this episode. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. As you guys know, I wrote a book. It just hit #1 on Amazon twice, and for substance abuse. So if anybody knows anybody struggling with substance abuse or depression, please pick up this book, because the last 2 chapters are: what does depression look like, not what you think it looks like, and what does addiction look like, and not what you think it looks like. So it's actually it's a teaching book, and 22% of all proceeds go to help veterans struggling with homelessness and PTSD. So definitely pick out the book. I'll drop the link. Write book in the comments if you're interested. And also, I want to thank our sponsors, Maxwell Soaps. As you guys know, I'm a diabetic, and I got very itchy skin when I use crappy soaps with detergent on it. So they actually have a soap with no detergent that doesn't get you itchy. But for every bar of soap that they sell, they give a bar of soap away to help the homeless population in Los Angeles, California. So their soap with a mission, and their hashtag is "Don't Be Nasty." So guys, if you want to help, if you don't want to be nasty, you want to help other people out, check them out. Guys, this is going to be an amazing interview. We've been friends for a long time. I'm a part of his group, and I'm constantly learning. Brent, my brother, thank you so much for hopping on today.
Man, it's my pleasure, and I hope I live up to expectations here. I think this is going to be a fun one because we get to talk about some things I really haven't had a chance to talk about a little bit. So, I'm connected to the veteran world and that kind of thing. So, I'm excited.
So now, where did you come from? Where did you grow up? And what kind of little boy was Brent?
Man, Brent was okay. Let me try to answer these in order for you. So, grew up in a little small town called Lake City, Florida. Most people know it because they go through it either on 10 or 75. It goes right through, it's right there at the top of Florida. But it's basically like South Georgia. So it's very redneck. It's very, I say that affectionately, but it's very Southern. And it just is a small town. And that's kind of what I grew up in. I grew up riding my bike. I grew up before I was a digital immigrant. So I grew up before all of this stuff happened in the world. I spent most of my time outside playing baseball, spent most of my time riding over to my friends, riding my BMX, mudding as we used to call it, just going, running through the woods, you name it, fishing. Did a lot of that with my dad. And yeah, that was kind of the upbringing. It was just a different world than it is now for kids. And I don't even know nowadays if small towns, they have the internet too. So it's just a different experience that I don't think is going to be there for kids anymore. So I'm grateful for that. And, but I'm also grateful for the new world too. Yeah, what kind of kid was Brent? I mean, adventurous / mischievous, I guess you could say. I was always out there pushing the envelope, testing stuff. If my dad would tell me not to do something, I'd say, well, why not? I had to go try it out for myself. I had one of those kind of temperaments where I had to go learn it for myself. And, my parents were always there to try to pick me up and dust me off when I did stupid stuff, which was more often than I like to admit. One example comes to mind, you always see the Tarzan, on TV, don't try this at home. I'm the reason they said, don't try this at home. I remember vividly, I was probably 9 years old and tied a really nice knot that I learned in Boy Scouts all around my waist and jumped out of a tree. And I was dangling from the tree with this rope. My mom comes out the back door and we had like a 2-lot. So it was far enough away she couldn't see where I was dangling from and just saw me screaming. So that gives you a little insight into what I put my parents through. I regret it now as a grown man, but when you're a kid, man, you just do the best you can.
Now you grew up with a brother. Your father was in the military at one time. So talk about that.
Yeah. So I had a younger brother. My dad at 17 was he was a Marine in Vietnam, and he served 2 tours, and he was a machine gunner. And some of the stories, I'm sure it wouldn't surprise you, Richard, but some of the stories would surprise most people. And I told my wife some of the things that I've seen by way of him and some of the experiences he shared in photos, even in some cases. And that affected us growing up a lot. You mentioned the PTSD and everything. And I think people that don't understand that don't realize how impacting it is, not just for the individual, but everybody in their circle. Absolutely affects it. And he came back from the war after, because he volunteered, he enlisted, and then he went back for a second tour. And so when he came back, he didn't know how to react. He came back to being called a baby killer. He came back to sitting in a restaurant always facing the door. Because I think he told me it was like 36 or 48 hours, I forget, from the time he was in the jungle to the time he was back in the US sitting in a restaurant and then back, right? And so I can't even begin to understand what that must be like, living in this like crazy life-threatening situation all the time, to like back and forth. But it impacted him as a father. I think he came back and he was a DI in Paris Island, and coming just out of the war, he had a certain temperament about how to prepare these young guys to go over there. And you see the movies where the DIs don't take any trash from the recruits and things. Well, it's when you're fresh out of a war and you've just had boots on ground over there and you're seeing bullets flying. And like I say, I mean, he's seen some real crazy stuff. These guys with the punk attitudes and things, it just doesn't fly. And it's not a movie, it's real life. And so he actually, I think he didn't get dishonorable discharge, but he hit a recruit when he was coming back from that. And so I remember too, one time when I had left the house and went down a couple houses down from the neighbors. I don't want you to think my dad's abusive. He's not. I'm just trying to paint a picture of what he's had to go through in his life, and how you, as a kid, basically, right? You're 18, 19, 20 years old. You're not you're an adult in some senses, but when you get down the road, you realize you were still a kid mentally and emotionally in a lot of ways. But yeah, and he had caught me down the road, and he spanked me from that kid's house 2 houses down, all the way back down the road, all the way back up into our house, into my bedroom, into my bed. And, because I scared my mom to death. I deserved it. And I didn't have like welts or anything, but it was just, there's a different level of discipline when you see those sorts of things, and the stuff I think stays in your psyche, and it affects everything in your life. And I don't know that everybody realizes. Those are just a couple of quick examples. I'm not sure everybody realizes how much it impacts the family and even the person just forever. He's still haunted to this day.
Yeah, and also, like my kids know that there's such a thing as Kaufman time, where if you're 5 minutes early, you're 10 minutes late.
Mm-hmm.
You always have to be early for everything. And me and my wife, we don't argue about much, but I'm a dad. You're a dad. But I have I got a 17-year-old boy, a 19 boy, and I got a 10-year-old daughter. And
oh, wow.
Where me and my wife disagree was, I'm trying to raise men, and she's trying to be the mom. So a lot of times we have that little bit of I can be a little bit harder on them. Be like, all right, suck it up, Buttercup.
Yeah.
But thank God, I think one of the great things about being in the military is my kids are doing really well. They believe that there's no room on there's always room on the extra mile, so they're always willing to push hard and push push through the stuff that a lot of kids don't go through today. So now, question I got to ask you, this is probably the most important question I'm going to ask you today. Florida State or Miami?
So when I was a kid, we didn't have anybody in the household that was a fan. So even though it was, I liked Florida State at that time, and that may be heresy to, but I liked Florida State at the time because they had a really high powered, air it out type of offense. It was in Bobby Bowden days and stuff like that. But man, at this point, we were close to Gainesville too. It's just, Miami was a bit further south for us. But yeah, I'd probably still say Florida State.
All right, guys, we got to go. It was a great interview.
Time to go. What are you, Florida?
I'm a Kane guy. I'm a big Kane.
Okay.
Although
they had some crazy offense back then too, though.
Well, back when it was the U, when it was really the U.
Yeah.
So now, in high school, were you an athlete? Were you a student? What kind of kid were you in high school?
So I played a lot of baseball and had a lot of talent, but I'm about 5'9", and I was a late bloomer, and the way my birthday fell, I was really behind. That sounds like a lot of excuses, but long story short, I didn't have the physicality to match the talent. And I tried out for baseball in my 9th grade year. I was sick. I couldn't hit the ball out of the infield. I wasn't going to be hitting home runs anyway, but I quit. I didn't go back, and I regret that to this day. Not because I think I would have been like a pro baller, but just because I quit, and I shouldn't have. And I think I argued my dad, and he pushed hard on it, but eventually I was a pretty strong-willed kid, and I got through. And yeah, I regretted that. But anyway, so I remained small, didn't hit puberty till really late. I didn't have hair on my legs till like 17 or something. So you imagine in a masculine kind of a world in sports and things like that, it starts to affect your confidence level with girls and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it hit me pretty hard. So I wish I could say I studied hard. I did enough to get by. I was lucky to do pretty well there. But man, I missed playing baseball. I played some tennis after, but it wasn't the same as being on a team and getting to play baseball. So, but it worked out because my son's really not sort of wired that way for sports. And so I have these other things that I've sort of learned that I'm able to relate really well with him. And maybe I wouldn't have had that opportunity. So, it's funny, in the moment, you can sometimes be all upset, but you don't necessarily know where life's going to take you. So just try to be grateful for it.
Did you go to college? Did you get any, educational scholarships or anything to go to school?
No, I did get into Georgia Tech, but at least my mom says I got into it. I didn't think I did, but anyway, I went to Georgia Southern mainly because I had difficulty making some friends. And I went down there because my two friends that I'd made right at the end of senior year of school were going down there. So I went down there with a transfer program at Georgia Tech, but then we partied too much and I just didn't end up being able to cut it. Fast forward way later in life, I went back to school, got a degree in computer science. And so I've, I wanted to finish that. And but not the first time around did not go so well.
By the way, I got to say, my son is going to love you because he's a junior in school and we're actually looking at Georgia Southern. Because my other son goes to Coastal, so we're going to have a Coastal and Georgia Southern kind of rivalry in the house. So what made you go back to college and what made you choose the field that you chose?
So I was an engineering student at first because I was math and science in high school. I always just kind of had a talent for that. But back then it wasn't as rigorous. They didn't have the plans in place like they do now for kids. There's really kind of coaching and structure differently now. But so I ended up in engineering, which was kind of the thing at the time. This is 1992 when I graduated. So computers were around. It just wasn't, obviously it's everywhere now, like everything has technology. So yeah, that's kind of the path. And then as far as later on in life, I'd never really liked the engineering. Like I liked the math and science, okay, but I never really loved the engineering. I never really loved the path. But later on, I started dabbling and making websites on my own. And I just found I was really interested in how technology works and how it's starting to really affect everything. You're playing video games and it's just everything is tech. So I wanted to learn about that. And so that kind of took me in a different direction, which is why we ended up starting Poddit. I actually met, which is not what we have now, but my co-founder in that old platform I met him in college. He was there later in life too. So like I said, you never know where life's going to take you if you just, eventually take some good steps. My first ones weren't too good, Richard.
Now for me, I'm an accidental podcaster. This was never meant to happen. What happened was I was working with GNC, General Nutrition Center, and I started a podcast, 30 seconds a day. I was trying all new products, just to be like, hey, this tastes like ass. This works. This is horrible. This is great. And then when I lost 80% of my vision, I was like, all right, I got to do something. Yeah. So what happened was I was looking for the worst case people that I can interview in the world that had it better than me. Like a guy that he had both his arms and his legs were blown off in Afghanistan. But at this time, he's skiing in Aspen with his family.
Wow.
So I started, finding people that inspired me. And that's when the whole podcast really started. And now it's become this thing. Thank God. It's a God thing. He's in charge. But it's amazing how, something as simple as starting a podcast can change your whole world. And, I'm big on LinkedIn. I think I have like almost 25,000 connections on LinkedIn. And people don't realize that podcasting is the new radio.
Hmm.
People don't listen to radio anymore. Usually it's more about podcasts and stuff like that. So when you tell somebody, oh, I'm a podcaster, 60% of them know what you're talking about. The other 40% are like, what?
Yeah.
But now,
Mm.
anytime, even if you're watching TV, even I'm a big ESPN guy, everybody's got a podcast. So talk to us about, the podcasting game, what it is like now, and should people still get involved in it?
I think when I started, I was kind of like you in a way. I was sort of an accidental podcaster too. So in 2014, the same gentleman that I mentioned before, who I met, and we ended up starting Poddit. Before that, met him in college, and we were working together. We ended up after school, we worked together, and we were having all these interesting conversations, being the nerds that we are, about technology and all the kinds of things. And but also, he had a daughter, and I had 3 kids myself, and so we talked about that too. And we started realizing we're the very last digital immigrants to raise the very first generation of digital natives. Our kids will be always on, and that's never going to happen in history again. Like, we're the last of one breed and the first of a new breed, and here we are as dads trying to figure this out. And I mean, it's already hard enough to be a dad as it is, never mind everything coming at you with the changes, right? So we said, well, why don't we? Andrew knew about podcasts. I didn't even know what they were. He said, well, let's just get on mic and start having these conversations on mic, right? We should preserve these. And we did, and we had, I don't know, 5, 10 listeners, and it was terrible, as you might imagine, at the beginning, Richard. And then around episode 5, we stopped trying to do something that, whatever, and I kind of just got comfortable on mic, and we flipped on the microphone for our kids, and man, magic happened. We started to record them and cold open with our kids and like talk about a topic. Like, I would ask my kids, hey, do you think dad yells too much? Or do you think dad's been on his phone? Or just whatever topic we were going to talk about on the show. I would have interesting conversation with my kids, and then we'd take a clip and open like that. And sometimes that was, it was vulnerable, but we wanted the audience to be able to learn. And then we were able to get guests on the show too. And man, those people we brought on the show connected with these dads in a way. We had dads emailing us saying, I feel better prepared from the delivery room. I feel better prepared to be a dad because of your show. I don't take credit for that. It's the people we were able to bring on, and they felt like they were part of a community, that they were able to alleviate some of that fear, some of that tension, and say, hey, you're not by yourself with this whole thing, which is a lot similar to what you're going on too. And that community was behind them, and had a Facebook group and stuff. So yeah, it was. We don't have it now, but we had 2 solid years of something that really, really mattered to a lot of people. I don't know, a number of people. So man, it was amazing. As far as now, I don't know if you'd call it a podcast now necessarily. I mean, you're recording on live streaming, it goes out everywhere. But as far as capturing and starting something for your message, I would say start with, what is it you hope to accomplish, right? So if you're just trying to flip on a switch for money, I think money can definitely be had, and it can definitely be gained. And I've seen people grow their audiences and do this stuff. But the people who really kill it, the people who really go out there and connect and grow an audience, aren't trying. The money is a result of them doing something that they're passionate about. Like you said, they care about, they want to build. Because when you don't get those downloads, when you don't get that, you're not worried about it. You're just trying to have a conversation with the people who want to hear it, who want to be part of it. And so that starts to gain some momentum. But it's splintered now. I would say if you have a passion and you want to talk about it, absolutely do it. But understand, it's all over the place. So if you think you're just going to all of a sudden magically flip a switch and everybody's going to come listen to you, there's never been more choices than there has been before. I think like you have a really nice targeted audience, and who they are and what they want to hear, and you're able to serve that to them. And we try to dial that in on our show too. And the better you're able to do that, they can't duplicate those conversations anywhere else. And you're not going to duplicate you either. Richard, I mean, you're a person, you're a certain individual. They come largely because they like you, because they want to connect with you. They want to be part of your sphere. And so, yeah, absolutely. I would say do it. But if you're just looking for money, maybe rethink it.
And a lot of people, like I've read, 'cause I do a lot of studying. And just in the last 6 months, I've taken a lot of courses on podcasting because I want to be great at what I do, and you don't know what you don't know. So you have to study until you do know. And it seems like, they say, there's over 2 million podcasts, but only 50% of them are active. Mm-hmm. And if you go past episode 13, you're in like the top 10% in the podcast in the world. And there's something we call pod fade, where people don't realize that you know it's work.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you have to work to find guests. You have to once the podcast is released, it takes work to do make little vignettes, to do your write-ups. And a lot of people get burned out because I'm not seeing those hundreds of thousands of downloads. I'm not getting sponsors. So talk to us about pod fade.
I mean, so part of our challenge was, like you said, getting the right guests. And it got to the point, quite candidly, where a couple our later guests, I won't name names, but a couple of the ones toward the last part of the podcast, we had people on just to have people on because we had sort of had a commitment to have an episode a week. And at the time, there weren't easy ways on Facebook groups, or there weren't all these people that were like raising their hands saying they wanted to be guests, where you could easily find interesting people for conversations. I was going on Amazon. I was looking up authors. I was cold outreach. And so it was a really big effort. And I had certain topics I wanted to talk about, and tracking down the right people was tough. And then, like I said, I had 3 kids and was trying to juggle everything. And it got to the point I was doing a show about trying to be a really great dad, and I realized I needed to be more present. Like you said, it takes work and effort. And especially if you care about trying to do something good, it takes even a little bit more work, right? You have to show up every week. You can't just whenever you want to do it. And maybe that's an approach for some people, but that's not where we were. We had built an audience that really had come to expect every week we were going to be there. We were part of the routine, and we didn't want to, we want to make sure we served them that way. So for us, it got to the point where it just wasn't working. And I think I don't want to say we were dialing it in, but it wasn't as good as I know we could make it. And I know it was pulling me both directions, and something had to give. And when you find yourself in that situation and your kids are on one end of that rope, it's pretty easy to decide what happens to the other side. I had to cut it. So, but I've been able to be more present with my kids, and we still have, going back and listening to them on my kids and some of these. Oh, we used to have our audience come on the show too, which was sometimes a mistake because we didn't even qualify them. We just said, you want to be on the show? Great. We'll get 5 of you on here. We'll do a round table. But yeah, listening to some of those now, it's one of the most important things I've done in my life. And we never got big and famous from it. We never grew money from it. You could really say it was middling as far as the world would say. But to me, it's an amazing part of my journey on this planet, is having done that show with my kids and all these other guys, and that part of my journey as a father. So yeah, I really think people should do it if they want to do it,
Now, there's a lot of people that have had success, and then like a gentleman, he emailed me. He's like, you know what, Rich? I guess because now I'm considered some kind of authority, which I'm definitely not an authority. But he's like, I need help. Can you help me? He's like, I kind of had that pod fade, and I quit, but now I miss it. But the game has changed.
Yeah.
Like a couple of years ago, you could have put out anything. It didn't matter if your graphics looked good. It didn't matter. Like for me, I know that, I'm great at interviewing people. I'm great at talking to people. But for me, graphics is like a 3-year-old did it.
Mm.
Or, my marketing, my branding, I'm not good at it. I suck at it. So I had to hire people that were good at it. So talk to us about, when a person steps out of the game and then they try to step back into the game and find out it's a whole new ball game.
So I sort of tried to step back in with Digital Dads, but it is a whole new ball game. I think tools like StreamYard, I think now one thing though, there are a lot of tools available that can make you show up. Maybe that's a little bit why the bar got raised, is because there are some tools to make it a little simpler. Canva with respect to graphics and stuff. But yeah, it's always been, I think, and also it's broadcast all over social media now more so than it was before. And they're starting to integrate it. I know YouTube might be integrating podcasts, and, you see these live streams, and there's an expectation probably from the listeners. But at the end of the day, if they find you, you're going to have to be engaging on mic. I think at the end of the day, it's going to be charisma or knowledge or personality or whatever it is that they connect with, because all that other stuff is maybe bare minimum, but you still got to deliver and connect with people on a human level, because if you don't, it's just going to be all sizzle and no steak, and they're not going to stick. It'd just be throwing a bunch of mud against the wall and doesn't stick. But it is harder. But I would say if you use like Canva, if you go on Facebook groups, if you understand you're going to have to put in a little bit of effort to kind of catch back up, you can do it, and you can do it quicker than you think, because you don't even have to do your own audio editing if you don't want to. There's tools out there. It just depends. Is it a business for you or a hobby, or somewhere in between, and what degree of effort, and where do you want to draw the line? And be okay with, if you're going to draw a certain line, it may impact certain things, because there's trade-offs there for sure nowadays.
And like, my friend Gary, Gary Vaynerchuk, a lot of people, they started a podcast because they want to be the next Gary V. There's only one Gary V. And a lot of times, like you said, you have to find your voice to where, a lot of people, you can't out Gary V.
Right.
You can't out Tony Robbins. And I think a lot of times it takes maybe 20 or 30 episodes to finally find your voice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now
absolutely.
Talk to us about what you're doing now, what you got going on. Talk to us about One Sheet, which I love. I love One Sheet.
I mean, so this whole thing with guests and connecting and everything, we had an old platform, and it was sort of a sandbox platform. We helped, 10,000 interviews happen, which I really love. Like I said, I had that digital dad show, and that was a pain point for me. But now I see it's splintered everywhere. And these conversations, I still want there to be a place where you can find pretty much anybody. So we started a new platform where you can basically create a one sheet, a one pager kind of thing. You can add your podcast, you can add your live stream, all that other kind of stuff, guest appearances, testimonials. So if I'm reaching out to you, Richard, and say, hey, I'd love to be on your show, I can hand you this link and you can see everything about me really quickly, right? And you can make a determination pretty quickly, because as a podcaster, I really appreciate that. I used to get, I don't know if they still do this now, but I used to get emails with, chase me around the internet with these 10 different links. And then here's a Word document, PDF with there's not really a great way for them to present themselves quickly and respect my time as a podcaster. I had all those other things going on. I'd love to have you as a guest. Your credibility gets shot when you're handing me some of these things. So we tried to make a tool that could do that. Now, one of the things that I think is really interesting about it is it's open. So if you go on and you create that, you can represent yourself as a guest and you can use it. It goes inside the directory, but it can work with people outside the directory. So for example, if I sent you my one sheet and you're like, oh, cool, I'll invite you. Or if you found it on my social bio or something, you could click and connect with me. I could talk to you from inside the platform. You don't have a sign up wall. We don't want any friction in between an opportunity for the guest. We don't want any friction in the way to stop you from being able to connect with them. So that's really interesting as the directory grows, because if TV finds it or radio finds it, they don't have to be part of our network to reach out to these people. We want those opportunities to be available to them, because as it grows, Google's going to find it even more. We don't have any sign up wall. And so we want to try to, create as many opportunities, because these messages matter, right? And there's so many experts that I've met, I'm sure you've met, but they have a hard time now because competition is fierce now. I mean, there's so many people with so much stuff to talk about. So just trying to help cut through the clutter and make something cool. So,
all right. So now let's talk about that, because for me, as you know, as we talked before we got on the show, I'm all about creating value. I'm all about helping, you or helping whoever my guest is get their message out, get their story out. But, for me, like when I wanted to have Miss Sharon Lecter on from Rich Dad Poor Dad,
yeah.
I said, I messaged her on LinkedIn and I said, Sharon, I love everything you're doing. And I showed her a picture of I got a whole wall of just Rich Dad Poor Dad books.
That's great.
And I said, I know you and Mr. Reed, Greg Reed, have a new audio book out. I'm listening to it now. I think it's amazing. I would love to have you come on so I can promote your new book.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people are more apt to say, wait a minute, they're not asking for something. They're trying to give. But a lot of times, especially on LinkedIn, I get the, hey, bro, I would love to come on, I want to come on your podcast, so talk to us about what's a proper way to introduce yourself to get to prospective guests.
So let me caveat this and say I'm not an expert. I have my own experience, and I've seen a lot of other podcasters by way of the platform, and I've seen a lot in our old Facebook group too. What I can tell you is, number one, I saw this today. Make sure you know the person's name, right? Don't go. This literally happens where they'll just reach out and it's blasted, and they copy and paste, and maybe they don't change the name and that kind of thing on accident. Um, I think it's important if you want to get success from the guesting game. I think it's really important to go for the relationships, go for building relationships. I think if you keep that in your mind, it changes everything about how all of your transactions happen, because you're talking about meeting a person. And what happens is within a niche, those relationships, I've had things come back around to me, and I'm sure you're starting to see this too, later on from relationships that I've built and trying to do right by people and trying to bring value, rather than like, what can you get from me? Let me plug my website every 5 minutes on the podcast, etc. Let me just have a good conversation with somebody. But that starts with that initial reach out. And it depends on how you're doing it. But if it's cold, man, listen to their show, try to find out about them, try to understand, one, would this be a good show for me to go on? Do our audiences align? What could I bring to them? And that's a little bit more effort than, like, I think what happens is a lot of times guests want to go out there and just get on as many shows as possible. Well, that's not relationship building. And it's cold calling. It's just, you're trying to just, you've heard sales is a numbers game. I think sales is more of a relationship game, to be honest, because I think it comes back to you tenfold if you really lay the groundwork. But it's not as fast, it's not as sexy, and I don't know if people are going to love that advice, but treat it like you would a real person. All the success I've had from cold outreach and different as a podcaster, to guests and otherwise, has been when I took the time to try to know something about them, like you did with Sharon, and try to reach out and say, hey, I think this might be a value to you, and here's why. And that takes a lot more time to think about, to research, to write an email than to copy and paste something in there. So like I said, maybe not work for everybody as far as like what they want to do. But I would also argue too, real quick, if you're going to get success from this, it's not going to happen instantaneously. It's going to be a bit more of a marathon than a sprint. It can happen in a couple of months, but it's not going to happen probably in a couple of days or a couple of weeks till you really start seeing this happen. But do the groundwork, put in the time, and you'll start getting referrals. You'll get traction, you'll get momentum, as you go. But man, look at it as a little bit more of a long game and treat people like you'd want to be treated. It's not really that hard. It's just people don't do it, which is why you'll stand out.
Okay. And another thing I want to, talk about is, for me, I want to ask questions that most people don't ask. Like I had Mr. Steve Sims on. He wrote a book called Blue Fishing. And, but, he's on like 5 or 7 different podcasts a week.
Yeah.
So, a friend of mine is a friend of his said, don't ask him about Elton John. I was like, all right, I'm not going to ask him about Elton John. But I did ask him, I said, Mr. Sims, tell us about when you were 16 years old and you were laying brick because you were homeless with your future wife. And he's like, wait a minute, you went that far? He's like, nobody ever asked me that question. And I was like, well, because I'm not your average guy. And before we start, he's like, all right, I got 30 minutes. That's all I got. So we get to the 30-minute mark, and I'm like, Steve, I'm at 30 minutes. I know you got to go. Mm-hmm. He's like, no, let's hang out for another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
And he's like, aren't you going to ask me about Elton John? I'm like, not really. So I think a lot of people think, you have to be different. And, for me, they call me the G.I. Joe Rogan or, the veteran Oprah, because sometimes I want to talk about things that other people don't really talk about, like, talking about you and your dad and, talking about you and your kids. So talk about how a person can be different in their interviewing style.
No, I think you nailed it, Richard. I think it's finding your own authentic voice and being curious yourself. I used to do an outline, but before I did interviews from the host side, but I would just be putting down things that I wanted to know about this person. What was that like? And I've always had this curiosity. But what happens is if you ask the more traditional questions, especially with guests who get on a lot of shows, they're going to go right into a very canned answer. It's almost scripted. It's not, but it's almost, and it's the same thing. And so you listen to this show or that show. And so I had already heard it. My audience might have already heard it. I wanted to know something different. And maybe it's related to the topic. A lot of times I had some curiosity about, well, didn't that, just my own personal thing, what was that like if I was in their shoes? And I think that always got me to think, if I was in their shoes, what would that feel like? Wow, I wonder if that impacted his wife or just those kinds of things. And I think that ability to sort of try to be empathetic with another human being and like, wow, that would have been an experience. Tell me, what was that like for you? How did that? And they will usually get caught off guard at first because they're not able to roll out the canned answer. And then you get into a real conversation and you meet the real human. And I think that always wins and makes good content when you're connecting with a real human being on the other side of the camera or mic or whatever format we're talking about. Yeah, I know these aren't like exact packaged answers, but I think people don't do this. I think people get on camera or get on mic, and I did this really bad early on too, and still fall victim. And they try to present themselves rather than just be a real person with another real person and have an interesting conversation. We bring our guardedness, and that vulnerability allows us to find some interesting conversations that people are thinking about, they're not hearing. And so you want to be different, you want to be unique, just be yourself and really dive in, go for it.
And now another, because like I said, I'm helping a few podcasters get their show up and running. And, and after they have a few episodes, I ask them, like, well, what are some of your main problems? And this is, well, a lot of times I'll have a guest on and they won't share their episode.
Yeah.
So I say, okay, so, for me, like he doesn't, Steve doesn't normally share his interviews, but because I said something, that touched him, he shared it. But also like in my Calendly link, I ask, will you share your,
mm-hmm.
And that was taught to me by a gentleman named Mr. Zach Babcock, Underdog Empowerment. But he taught me, because once they say they're going to do something, they normally don't want to go back on their word. So
no, it's commitment bias or whatever. I don't know if you've ever read the book by Robert Cialdini, Influence. Yep. Oh man. Yeah.
So talk to us, how you would get a person to share their episode. Because I found out once I do those couple things that almost 100% of the people will share their episode. So how do you go from, sometimes getting 0% people to share to getting people to share it?
Well, now I'm learning from you because I think those two things are golden. I think setting the expectations from the beginning so that they know and they expect it. And then you were following up too, making it easy for them. That's one thing maybe that could help too, right? Like, here's a couple of things. I've had a couple of people share like little stingers with me or little things so that it's already prepackaged for me. Now that does create a lot more work, but depending on the guest and their audience, you may want to do that for sure. And if you're already going to be sharing them yourself anyway, you might as well give them the opportunity to do that. Another thing I would say is make sure if you're going to get them to share, and it sounds like you figured out how to do that, make sure that when you're interviewing people that the audience is aligned, because we had David Allen of Getting Things Done on our show on Digital Dads. And I say that because he had like 2 million Twitter followers and he did tweet it out, but he does a number of shows and he tweets them out. And our show isn't about productivity and his audience is all about productivity. His productivity worked for us as dads for our show, but us being digital dads didn't necessarily resonate with his audience the same way. And we got a little bit of a bump and then it went away. So you can put all the time and effort into it, but be realistic about what the results of getting them to share are going to be, even if they have a big audience. The more aligned you are, I think you're going to get better results if you partner up with somebody that has a similar audience and you cross swap interviews or something and you cross promote and build some relationships, because most people that love your content are going to love their content and they've got room for both. It's not going to affect you. It should only help both of you. But I think you might get more traction that way. And I'm not saying don't interview people like David Allen. Sure, we had a great episode for our audience. I just kind of thought it was going to magically give us a big boost, and it just didn't. It just didn't.
And now, like Gary talks about, I think, TikTok is a very big platform. YouTube is a big platform, and I didn't realize how big of a platform YouTube was until my 10-year-old daughter walked in on me. I'm a big video game guy, so I'm playing NASCAR Heat, and I'm driving the what's the name of the? I'm driving one of the cars and it has an energy drink on it, Monster.
Wow.
And she goes, "Oh, that's the Monster car. That's the Monster energy drink." And I'm like, "Wait a minute, you're 10 years old. What do you know about?" She's like, "Because it's all over YouTube." So a lot of people don't realize, this stuff is being ingrained into your children. There's a reason why KFC is spending up to half their budget on TikTok this year. And a lot of people don't realize that if you're not on some of these platforms now, that you're going to be left in the dust. So talk to us about, getting your podcast on more than just say Anchor or Spotify, but having them on different platforms. Because somebody once told me, if you're not everywhere, you're nowhere. So talk to us, give us a little bit of advice on where to put your podcast. Because like you said, if you have a podcast and you just put it out, it could be like writing a book and put it on Amazon and you hear crickets. If it's not, it's not out there, nobody's going to find it.
It's tough. I think you're exactly right. Again, I mean, Richard, you're obviously knowledgeable about this stuff too, man. But I think YouTube is huge. It is so huge, and we didn't. It dawned on me back when we were doing our Digital Dad show, because my kids would come up to me and they were more likely to know celebrities from YouTube than they were celebrities that I traditionally. And that was a bit of a switch for me, because like, what do you mean? No, they know those people. Those people are every bit a celebrity as these other people. It's just I didn't grow up in that world, so I wasn't able to relate. And I think that sometimes holds us back, right? When we're coming from a place that was different and the world changed and they didn't know the old way, so they don't have to let it go and they're just embracing how things are now. And I'm carrying what I used to think it was, and now it's different. And platforms come up all the time. You hit the two big ones, YouTube and TikTok now. Figuring out how to I don't know. I think for a podcast, specifically on TikTok, it's tricky. I think you got to figure out I don't think you need to take bites of your podcast and try to put it on TikTok. I think you need to find relevant things, and I'm experimenting with it now on Digital Dads, but even though the show's gone, but find relevant things that hit the TikTok audience the way they do. If your audience is on TikTok, though, right? Because your audience, depending on the age group, or my audience, depending on the age group, might not be on TikTok right now, right? So you could be spending all your time on TikTok and it might be that audience misalignment. It depends on each show. But to ignore it, I don't think that's a wise idea. I would say at minimum, get in, play around with it. But we mentioned earlier, YouTube is going to be adding podcasts. I think that's the rumor, maybe confirmed, I'm not sure, but they're going to be adding RSS feeds. So getting in and figuring out how to use YouTube. I'm not an expert on that. I know a couple of people who are amazing at it, but getting in there and two, to be able to do that, instead of just popping up something on the screen, start doing video. Everybody's doing video. You can do something. It doesn't have to be fantastic, but at least they get a sense of the people. And that way you have something to put on different mediums. If they come out, you've got video archives, not just the audio, because the audio might be limited depending on the platforms that start to emerge. We don't know where it's going. We just know that it keeps changing.
I love it. So last question I have, I had last week or the week before, one of the Iron Chefs on the show, Simon Majumdar, and he was telling me how, since this whole COVID thing started, we've lost over 100,000 restaurants in the United States.
Wow.
So we have a lot of people that are, driving Uber, DoorDash just to put food on the table. So if I ask the average person to do something in 7 days in the United States, they're probably not going to get to it. But if somebody's listening to our show right now and we ask them to take an actionable step, they're more than likely to do it in the next 24 hours. So if somebody is thinking about starting a podcast, like I said on LinkedIn, podcast is the new radio. And if you're not on them, or if you're not guesting on them, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Mm-hmm. So if somebody is thinking about getting involved in podcasting, what can they do in the next 24 hours, maybe to start to move in that direction?
So I think probably the easiest thing, and I would encourage anybody that's thinking of starting a podcast to start with this. I may be a little biased, but I think it's 100% true. Go be a guest. Figure out what you want to talk about. Figure out where your expertise is and go start being a guest. And don't worry about the size of the show. Get out there and cut your teeth. See if you enjoy having the conversations. Get used to how it works. Get the butterflies out and the tech issues out. And then you'll know, okay, I kind of see how this part goes. Now, do I want to add on to these other things and take that next step? But in 24, 48 hours, you can go in Facebook groups. You can, obviously, we have a way, for you to have a profile, but have something. If you don't want to go have a website, that's an easy way. But have something in your Facebook profile or your Instagram that indicates your expertise, because they're going to click over and look at that, right? And you can get on shows in Facebook groups, in various, we had a platform, there's platforms out there, there's different places you can do it. So it's not that hard, but take that step, do it, be a guest. It's not hard, and there's no commitment past that. You could go be a guest, end up not loving it, walk away, and never have to worry about it. There's no commitment, but you may love it, and you can be on more shows, and then you're already starting to build a good catalog of having been a guest, and credibility and connections. So it's not a wasted step if you go forward.
I love it. So last question I have, how do we find your group? How can we support your mission? How can we support what you got going on?
I think our Facebook group is One Sheet Pro. You can just look in there, and probably the easiest way for people to find me is that. If you want to check out the website, it's onesheetpro.com. I'm always happy, Richard, help anybody any way I can with respect to that, or honestly, if they got questions, I may not be as immediately responsive, but if they got questions about podcasting or any of this stuff, I'll help however I can, or point them to some resources that might help them, get down the line. Cause I know it's tough. It's really tough. And, I want to see people get their message out there.
I love it, brother. Thank you so much. So guys, I had somebody just text me, said, what are you drinking? And I've been sipping on my own. I get high on my own supply. So if anybody is looking for an amazing coffee, check out Vertical Momentum Coffee. It's twice the caffeine, but I'm actually giving that coffee away on April 2nd. So if somebody's looking to get some free coffee or free shipment of coffee to your house, and put the word coffee down below, and we're going to make sure we get you entered into our elite newsletter, where we send interviews like this out once a week on every Thursday from today's top leaders and game changers. So make sure you put your coffee in there so you can get entered to win. Brent, brother, I'm so grateful for your friendship. Oh, I think we've been friends, for almost 3 years now.
Been a little while.
And I just wanted to say thank you, brother. And I'm so grateful that you're in my inner circle.
Oh, dude, it's pleasure's mine. Thank you for having me on the show.
All right, guys, remember, vertical momentum. The only way to go is but up. All right, guys, I'll catch you on the flip.